evening. Welcome to the Laughing Monkey Music Show. Teva and Glen Cummings. How are you?
Excellent. Glad to be here.
Well, we've tried this before, and I know things have changed around a little bit, so I apologize. And but as we were saying before, breaking the third or fourth wall, I don't know what wall or dimension actually, or ripping a tear in the fabric of the universe. I don't know. I'd met you once when you were actually in Scatterbrain, one of the bands we're going to talk about today, and you were actually pretty cool. You just met me, and I think you knew my girlfriend from the label actually. And you're like, oh, you guys come down here, you got to drive back. I think you're like, you guys need money for a hotel. I was like, yeah, like you actually said that. I'm like, you're like on a bus, and I was like, it was odd because I'm like, you are a starting out band. I thought it was nice to say, but I'm like, where these guys got money?
Yeah, I want to know. Maybe
Yeah, like
maybe somebody left a pile of money there
I don't know.
on
It
the
was it was,
bus
a,
by
it was a nice
accident.
offer. We just drove back, and but it was a nice offer. It was a actually I remember driving back in the car, and that was like it was a natural influence, a family vacation moment too. Like she's like she drove there, and I didn't drive, and driving back, she's like, I'm like, I can drive. I'm awake. I can do it. She's like a little car. We're driving down one of those long southern highways, the ones that have like the grass strips like that.
Yeah,
And I start falling asleep too. And she's asleep, her head's going and I start falling asleep. And the car goes like into it, and it goes and it woke me up. And I went, oh. So her head goes bam. And she's and I was like, we're fine, something right in front of us. So if you're out there, I'm sorry. I never
that's
feathered
a
up that one.
that's such
Yeah.
a story of like going to rock shows and they're supposed to be at 10 o'clock at night. And I mean, if you ever watch stuff in New York, you get a ticket for a 10 o'clock show, and it happens
Yeah.
at 2, 2, 3 a.m. in the morning, and then you have to drive home or sleep in your car. Or
Yeah.
it's like, oh my god.
And that's what happened. It was just so funny. I was like, that's the only time I've ever had like a near miss, like sleeping. I'm like, this can't happen again. I was lucky. I was stone cold sober too. We drove down to we were in Atlanta. I think we saw like shows like in at one point I think maybe like Baltimore and Washington. I think we drove around a lot to see you guys. Just long drives to see you guys.
Where was it in
Um,
Baltimore? Was it like Hammerjacks or something?
it might have been on Hammerjacks. Yeah, I do remember. I think DC one was like it was like in the Battery or some. The Battery was in a really bad area. Remember they had like
Right,
video walls and stuff.
right.
It was a weird
That's
place for you guys to be,
we played a
especially you
lot
guys.
of weird
Especially when you guys came
clubs.
out and did your encore, Molecules, Girls, Girls, Girls. And you guys all came out dressed as women.
Wasn't turning anyone on.
It was a very amusing show though. It was a very amusing show. So let's start back. So obviously the people know Glenn's most famous for you know him from either Ludicrist, depending on what generation you know, Ludicrist, Scatterbrain, or natural based rap rock, Stone Deep.
Yeah.
So he's accolades from different versions of bands from different sections of his time period of his life. Um, but really, obviously the beginning starts. I mean, obviously you have some smaller bands, but let's start like Ludicrous though is where you kind of really started to form. I think like the songs were changing. It was less. I think it felt like you had more structure. I've gone back and listened to your punk stuff, and it's fun and it's creative. It felt like everybody had their own ideas. But with Ludicrous, it feels like the songs were actually all starting to work together as a team.
Right.
I could be wrong on that.
No, no, no. I mean, it's kind of like the first Ludicrous moment was kind of like it was really interesting because I mean, even the story of how I got in the band. Like, I was in another band, and the band just broke up. We played our last show, and it was like Ludicrous was originally a four-piece, and they played a show at, like, I can't remember if it was February's or Right Track Inn in Long Island, and literally there was nobody. Like, my band kind of we played, there was nobody there, and then everybody left, and I was just like, I'm just gonna have a beer and watch this next band that there was nobody there for. Like, I don't even think there were girlfriends there was nobody, and I was just sitting at the bar, it was like, had whatever cheap beer, and Ludacris came on, and I thought, my god, this is the best band. It's literally the best band I ever saw. I thought Tommy was amazing, and like, so I just stood there. It was just me and the band, and I sort of heckled them through the thing, and then and drank more and more beer. And at the end of the show, I went up and I said, "Hey, I should really be um, in the band, don't you think?" And the strangest thing happened. The guys were like, "Yeah, I mean, yeah, that would be great."
Had they heard you? I
Right.
mean, I've heard people these stories before, but I actually never just ask. I mean,
I you know I think Tommy had been there early and saw the band. The band before was Horror Planet, and he kind of he liked it. But the other guys, I'm not sure. And so they were like, well, come down to rehearsal. Somehow I think they had in their mind, or some of them had in their mind, that it would be good to have two guitars, like that would be like heavier.
I
And
think
then
back then it was different though, right? I mean, like we all were like sometimes you something looks like if you get long rock hair, you get a guitar. Like we used to buy albums by album covers, not by listening to them. Like I think a lot of things
you
are
got it.
based just on like this could work. I saw this in a cartoon once. I
Yeah.
think this could work. Like
Yeah,
that
I
type of
think
thing.
exactly. There's no, it's not like when you watch the movie about Metallica replacing the bass player, and
Right. There's a
they
whole
they
in
interviewed
line.
68 bass players, and they're like, well, that guy doesn't have the right style. It was like you just basically put together whatever you could do, and it was a lot more subjective.
I think yeah, because luckily at that point you guys weren't like a corporation like Metallica where you had other people's salaries depending on how good this guy works out. Because if he didn't
Right,
work out, they could just get somebody else
right, right. The shareholders won't like it.
like get what against you.
So
But
those
you
guys
got
had
in
those guys
and
had songs. They had a core batch of songs. So initially, the thing I kind of did was like put like more guitar parts on them. Like the parts where I synced up with Mark Canabrocki, who was the guitar player, and then a lot of things where we put in guitar solos or we put in counter rhythms and stuff like that. And that's where you could kind of say that things start to have a little more structure. I mean,
right.
the songs that existed, they pretty much they got decorated, but they remained the same. And then over time, we kind of wrote more things that I was more involved with writing the next batch of songs that came out
Mhm.
on the. And then by the time we got to Immaculate Deception, there was or the CBGB's recording, and then Mark, who was the original guitar player, left, and Joe Butcher came into the band, and Joe co-wrote one song with Tommy, and then so we kind of had like this really nice selection of stuff that Mark had written with Alan, the original drummer, and those guys were like the founders. Some pieces that Chuck Valley had kind of written, some things that Tommy had kind of like written as a song, and then asked Mark to figure out how to play it, and then things that I had kind of done with Chuck, and then things we did and then a song that Joe brought in whole and Tommy put lyrics to. So it was kind of a really like it didn't take that long, but like there was a really good like collection of stuff that comprised those first kind of recordings.
Well, I think that's from here some stuff, and I think that's what you're right. I think you filled it in and then added to it, and then kind of everyone grew together. I think sometimes you hear a one guitar band unless you have multiple things written into it. Like some guitarists write for one person,
Right,
but nowadays, if you're the one guitar player and you're doing an album, you need to write yourself in mind with two pieces. You know what I mean?
right, right.
Or it's gonna be a very flat one dimensional skeleton of a song. You need to have some kind of melody or a second rhythm or something that does a Stones thing where you're like interweaving at least. You gotta have something else.
Right, right. I think the incarnation, or what Marx said to me for the incarnation of the first version with him and Alan, is that the thing that kind of they were like listening to like early thrash stuff, like, and there wasn't that much of it out.
Mm-mm.
And the thing that really got them inspired to go in the direction that turned into Ludichrist was the first Discharge album. They were like, which is so funny because if you just go back and listen to the very first stuff, that influence is really clear. But by the time we got to like Immaculate Deception, it's evolved. Like
Yeah,
the
yeah.
core of those songs are there, but it's kind of definitely evolved into a different, a slightly different thing. But yeah, I always loved Discharge. I mean, like to me, like they're maybe second only to like groups like the Ramones. And I don't think you could have had a Discharge
You know,
without a Ramones. But it's
and
like,
those were exciting. I mean, New York had, I mean, there's always certain times and periods and certain locations where it was hotspots. And New York back then was the best for like raw punk and the early rap. And I'm not taking it away from other people in other areas, but being from New England, I mean, that was where, you know, everything was new. There were no rules for rapping. There was no rules. That's like rap music. That's more like I like it because to me it feels like there's so many different styles. Whereas like when you get to a certain point, even with rock, it became like the same as same. That
right,
was at a point where rap, punk, everything kind of mixed together, which allowed a new band like you guys to evolve with all different influences. Even
right.
if you don't show your influences, you're hearing like, all different types of music
Yeah, it's kind
being
of
created.
it's that kind of that moment, I mean, like things really, especially for things that got considered hardcore afterwards, like the stuff that was happening at the sort of beginning in New York, like False Prophets and Kraut, and like each band was like there was no formula for what was
Hmm.
hardcore, and so everything was kind of really radically different. Where after a while, not to say that the bands aren't differentiated, but like a certain kind of thing where people were excited about, whether it was kind of like an agnostic front sound or like this kind of like a thing that would be identified as hardcore emerged, and then people are in relationship to it. But we were in Long Island too,
Right.
so the distance between Manhattan, like Lower East Side and Alphabet City and the Village, East Village, and kind of it might only be like 45 miles, but it might as well have been like the other side of the, might as well have been Australia.
Right. And people need to remember there was not an internet. There was not, you actually had to go to these clubs and see it or hear a bootleg tape of something of a soundboard at best. Maybe you could hear it, but there wasn't even much distributing of it back then either, as much as you would think there would be. There's probably
No,
more overseas shipping of tapes than there were probably local trading of tapes,
right.
you know?
Like there were only a couple radio shows you could tune into like once a week for half an hour,
Yep.
or like a couple record stores that would stock weird stuff. And then if you wanted it, you had to like go find $7 or whatever it was to buy something.
Yep.
So it wasn't like it was like you just go on and like you got everything right there. And then if you wanted to meet other people who were interested in your style of music, you literally put ads in the newspaper.
I
And
think,
what a slow process that
or
was.
you just pick them up at your gigs. That's where you're probably so tired of the newspaper. You're like, I think you just work out. We really can't do any work than we did before. And if it works out, it's just a bonus because he's already here.
I like that. Like in some ways, I saved the other guys in Ludicrous like $14, like by
Yeah.
just showing up at the gig.
They're
Be
already,
like,
yeah, they're
hey,
already ahead. We already got somebody. If he stays for 2 weeks, that's one less ad, you know? It's like
that's
a
awesome.
job interview. So, but for Mac, you guys were on, what label were you on? Because I know they changed, even work. Were you on Combat at
Right,
that point? They switched over. I don't even know.
right. It's because so the
And I interned from Television. I actually interned for Combat Ineffective Relativity. It was just my internship was like, 'cause I was going to college, music club full time. It was just like slashes between every name. So I
right.
literally did not know how it was all together. Yeah.
I don't think anybody knew. Not even Steve Sinclair, right? Like, so, uh, well, we put out like two demos and variations of them ourselves, and then we played at CBGB's, and Hilly Crystal liked us, so he had just started this thing that maybe ran like four different. He had started a sort of pseudo record label, which just
Mhm.
meant he was duplicating tapes of some bands that he recorded off the
Yeah.
soundboard. Um, so we did a thing on CBGB's label, and then we got kind of interest from what was then Combat, uh, was Relativity slash Combat, but
Okay.
the first Ludicrous record was on Combat Core,
Right. Okay.
and
That's
then
what I thought. Combat.
I think the second one they shifted us over to Combat, and then by the time we kind of shifted to Scatterbrain, basically what had happened was there was a reconfiguration, and the new label in effect was kind of thought up to kind of not just handle heavy metal, but I can't remember, it was like Limbo Maniacs and 24/7 Spies, and
Which were also really great bands. And I think it was
like
so more niche, not niche, but niche in a way. It was more eclectic. Actually, probably eclectic would be a better word because it allowed the outside genres to all kind of work together. Maybe.
right. Yeah, it was a nice moment where it was like, it was clear that like people who are into hardcore might also be into like funk stuff or dance stuff. Like it was the quality of the thing that was more.
You look kind of like a tie-in label, actually, like the crossover label between everything else.
Yeah, yeah, it was kind of brilliant. And so then the first Scatterbrain record, Here Comes Trouble, was on In Effect, and then towards the end of our album cycle, we wound up, Elektra Warner Brothers was interested, so they bought the remainder of our contract from Relativity, and then we put out one record on Elektra called Scamboogery, and then at the end of that cycle, I kind of left Scatterbrain, and the other guys put out a third album.
Yep.
I think it was considered an EP or not. I think it's considered a full
I
album.
think it's like what, 7 songs. I've seen it billed as an EP. Is it Mondo's?
Yeah, exactly. And then I kind of, like that was the trajectory of those recordings. But along the way, there's other weird things too.
Yeah.
Like we went to Australia, and in Australia we were on oh, I can't remember even which variation of the label was in Australia. And they put out a version themselves. And then because get this is pretty weird. Like in Australia, they wanted to re-release Here Comes Trouble because there was some sort of licensing
Yeah.
thing that was happening. So they could do it if they packaged it together with a live album. So they packaged Here Comes Trouble together with, they did a live recording of us in, like, I can't even remember, Dallas or something. Like some show that had a good recording, had like a studio that you could plug into. And they kind of released that as a double album. But mostly because they would need to get around licensing restrictions.
Also, that's what that live thing is out there probably.
That's
Is it
what
the
that
live
live
one?
thing. Yeah,
That's
yeah.
like on YouTube or something. Yeah. It actually was released. I've seen the release now. Getting out where it was from. I didn't know how legit it was because that's, well, we'll go back. People we'll talk a little more Scatterbrain in the transition, but I think the label thing's interesting because it is kind of weird. Those two bands, Ludichrist and Scatterbrain, the label changing of the guard on almost every single album, if you look at it, is just a little bit different.
Oh yeah, it's really.
And it's like no focus. And I imagine it happened to probably the other guys too, and the other bands that were similar.
I think it happened to everybody. Yeah.
Right. But I think that was a big mistake. I think they really messed up. Like I said, I think Label Maniacs and 24/7 and you guys, both those bands with the right support could have lasted through the grunge thing because you guys were so different. Like the Chili Peppers actually grew from it. I think you guys would have been more in that world of mixed music, and you could have just gone on without walls because it was just so different.
Right. I mean, 24/7 Spy is a kind of monster band.
Totally.
Like those guys are so fantastic, and I think they're back doing stuff again.
Yeah, they are. Actually, I think they did a show with Ludicrous.
Oh, we did tons of.
No, recently I think that was one of the shows.
Oh, was it one of the shows?
I think so.
I guess I should know that, but
I could be wrong. I know they just did a show, or it was around that time because I was going to go to each of them because I had Ricky on the show before too because I love that band 24/7.
Oh, yeah.
Another band that just kind of fell between the cracks. Especially when you look back at now, it's popular now. You're like, there are guys that were doing this way before.
I mean, to get back to your label thing, where it's like the label shifted. I think like when the first Ludichrist album came out, they were trying to figure out they always try and figure out who you're kind of like they're like, oh well, okay, people bought the Cro-Mags album, like they're kind of like by we can kind of look at that strategy and kind of like deliver them.
Mm-hmm.
So like we were kind of in this moment where Agnostic Front was signed and they had released their album. The Crumbsuckers were signed. I can't remember if I think their first album came out before ours, before Immaculate Deception of Life of
Yeah, I'm not sure myself.
Before. I think. Yeah, no, I'm pretty sure. And so they were kind of like, it was this kind of first moment in New York where kind of hardcore bands were being released by labels. Like Profile had Cro-Mags and Leeway. And Combat grabbed Agnostic Front. Crumbsuckers, us. A little bit later, but not that later. Sick of It All. Maybe Sick of It All was right around at that time too.
I think the labels didn't know what to do with them though. That was a problem. They grabbed all you guys up because they saw something happening, and once they had you, like all the labels, they didn't know what to do with any of the bands because it didn't fit into the rousters of what they had.
Right. Well, think like I mean, I don't want to speak for anybody, but Relativity made it got itself on the map by being a distributor of like the new British new wave kind of metal imports, and then kind of branched out to kind of being like a label from there. So it wasn't like they were like an A&R department that sprung a distribution, like they were a
No,
distribution network that sprung kind of an A&R
I
thing.
think once they combined all three and they're known, they just referred to everything as all three all the time. That's when you had Satriani and Steve Vai
Right.
also leading the charge. And actually, I met Steve Vai through Relativity too. I had dinner with him one time, like in that small Atlanta office. He came down. He had no tables or chairs. He had a couple of the executives there sitting at desks eating pizza. It's like a vegetarian pizza. I'm like, what's a vegetarian pizza? There's no meat on this. And like, because of Steve Vai, vegetarian back in the day, he came in. It was a passion of warfare. And he came in and he said, those guys, he sat down on the floor with all of us because we had no tables. So, Steve Vai in his full rock and roll regalia sat down with a bunch of interns instead of the suits and just hang
Right.
out and talked. I mean, that was just, he's always been that guy.
Right.
But that's how
That's
small it
right.
was back then. I mean, it was passion of warfare was pretty huge.
Right.
And the Atlanta office,
About
Steve Vai was sitting on the floor eating pizza with us during the release of that album.
I forgot about Vai and Satriani. Satriani, there was the first one, and then Surfing with the
Yeah.
Alien and whatever.
Yeah.
So interesting. Yeah,
Like
yeah.
Flying in a Blue Dream, I think. I forget some of the titles now. Yeah, but once he came out with that, and then Vi came out, and then I think they went back and they got his other flexible, or was that on Flavored Nations? I think it's really kind of wonky. But at that point, it was like Combat was doing all the metal bands, and they had like some of the Megadeth, and then in effect, relatively that guys, and a bunch of them had you guys 24/7. And at this point, everything was kind of being just kind of like pushed together as just going
Right.
out now on a street team
Right.
type of thing, where it's just here's all the bands we have. They just put them all together. That's how we were distributed to our office. Was like, this is all here's what we have.
Right. Here's the stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. Like we were grouped together in one way on the first album, and then I just came across some stuff from the Power Trip release. There are all these promotional posters that say, "Give me Ludichrist" or "Give me Death,"
Oh wow.
because they were like, our release was at the same time as Death.
Oh,
The the band from Tampa, the kind of death metal band, and it was like so funny. It was like, I mean, we wound up recording in Tampa, and because we were in Tampa, we kind of asked the guys from Death to come do background vocals on our thing because we thought it would be kind of like we didn't
well,
really know them, but like they were kind of releasing whatever. And so we got together with Ted. I felt like, oh, it's kind of interesting in some ways. Like they're kind of like, super intense and serious. And we're kind of a
and
bunch
they're
of,
legendary because they were very technical. To this day, they were known. I mean, Chuck's gone now, but for being very proficient
right.
musically.
Did Chuck pass away?
Yeah,
Oh,
from
God.
death. Oh god, a long time ago. Yeah,
When?
I
I
don't
wonder.
remember. It's been years, a long time ago.
Oh, wow. I
So
didn't hear.
they've had
But
death tributes and stuff now, but death's been dead for a long time.
wow. Okay.
They're still
Well,
releasing things. They're releasing live
yeah,
albums lately a lot. Lately,
I,
I know
I
some
bet
label
there's
got a hold
tons,
of it,
bet there's tons of stuff out there. So
but
we had like one thing with Immaculate Deception, then we had a totally other thing with Power Trip, and then like Power Trip critically was a critically was a failure at the time. Like people kind of thought we were kind of hardcore, a weird hardcore band when we were Ludicrous, and then we kind of did the Power Trip album. People were like, I'm not sure I know what this is, and so we still kept like the hardcore audience, but we didn't fully pick up the a metal audience, like because we were just too off.
like a growth period for you guys. Like you were like in like rock and roll puberty. Like you guys just were like awkward. Like your voice was going in and out. Like nobody knew where to go with it. Yeah, you want fries with
Well,
that, sir?
I feel like we knew it, we felt like we knew exactly what we
No,
were,
I meant
which
like the
was
fans,
like,
like in the labels, and the people are like,
right, but
wait, I don't know, like some because back then, but also a lot of people were there were like two types of I think people like either a lot of stuff, which would be like fans like me, musicians
right,
like you, and the guys, obviously all the guys in the bands, in all these bands, and the other fans were like hardcore, metal,
right,
pop. So there's like either you stayed in your swim lane or you hugged all the swim lanes,
right.
and there was less people hugging the swim lanes earlier on, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
There's only a
Oh
handful of
yeah,
my friends that we listen to everything. Everyone else kind of was like metal or punk.
right, right. Yeah, it was like a big deal. Like like if you went to see Agnostic Front, you probably didn't ever go to see Slayer, because that was like they might have been like both like heavy as
Yeah.
hell, but like basically they were in different genres. Or and then that moment, where groups like Carnivore or Nuclear Assault or kind of these other bands started kind of playing together on, and hardcore-ish bands or crossover bands started kind of getting
Yeah,
grouped
I
up.
mean
That
Slayer
was
did
like
Beastie
it was
Boys on
crazy.
Slayer, and then like you guys had Dan Lineker on Hello Freedom. So you had Nuclear Assault.
Yeah, I mean John Connolly from the singer kind of was good friend, and kind of we kind of try and enlist him for anything. He was
Up
willing
for.
to kind of hang around and kind of do uh, you know of course well paid with cold beer, or none of us had any money, so it was just like, hey man, you're around, and like, yeah, that's
Not
cool.
just about being creative though. I mean, and that's kind of what music's like now. You get paid with cold beer. So the
Yeah, and
industry's
it's
really
like,
gone full circle, circle life right there.
and you become friends with people whose music you kind of admire because you're just all playing shows, and then so, but anyway, like, and then in effect was a totally different animal by the time that got put together. So Power Trip, like, they were kind of like, I feel like the record label was like, okay, like, and then when the team, the In Effect team got kind of put together, and we were working on Here Comes Trouble stuff, then basically it was the first time where we were working on new material where somebody from the record label was like excited, and like came to rehearsals and was like, oh
But
shit.
what's the thought process and the change of going from like Ludicrous? And I know you guys you've been posting for people interest. Go on Glenn's page, and there's a Scatterbrain page, and Guy's got a page. I mean, so his all music page. So go support all the pages and everything. And Facebook, I'll put some up. And just interviews with Guy on there. Two guys on a lot. But what was the point where you started adding members and changing the sound? I mean, it was still a huge difference. It's like Jump is like, you know, it still had that mixture, but then the sound of just Scatterbrain was just like night and day almost still.
Right,
Like you could see the formation of it, but still when you got to the edge of the cliff and then the next day was like Scatterbrain, it was so
right.
polished and clean. And it was like almost like different people were. It's almost like Scatterbrain was influenced by that band. Like they grew up listening to
Right, right.
Ludicrous. They're like, oh yeah, listen to them growing up, and this is what I hear. Right, play them.
It's, well, so many things, so many things happen. So you have to always remember with any of these rockologies, like, nobody has any money, and everybody's like living with their parents. And like, we go out on a tour, it's like we go out on a tour and it's like five guys sleeping in the van,
Yeah,
because there's no money for a hotel. So at the end of the Power Trip thing, it's like we did a kind of US show, and we and along the way, Mike Walter, who was the bass player, kind of, just at some point he had to do other stuff, and so we got Guy in the band, Guy Brogna, who is kind of who is great. So I should back up. When we kind of shifted from Immaculate Deception to Power Trip, we got Paul Nieder in the band,
mm-hmm.
and Paul's fantastic. And he's like,
Yeah,
he came from a different world. Like, I came from like a punk rock, like I was a rock fan, but I was like, came through like hardcore
yeah.
and stuff. And Tommy was like a punk. He wasn't really like hardcore. He was more like punk, Replacements, aggressive rock, kind of like cool stuff fan. But Paul was like more of the world of kind of music. He had gone to like music school. He gave guitar lessons. I think at some point, I could be imagining this, maybe he was in a musicians union. He like would actually take jobs and go play as a guitar player. And when Paul joined the band, it was like, for us, it was like, wow, we can play some complicated stuff. It doesn't have to be me kind of playing the Ted Nugent version of a guitar solo. Like somebody can play like a John McLaughlin version of a dissonant guitar song. And also, we could kind of play together in a different way. So that form, like, we didn't really have a structure for rehearsing or recording or whatever. And so we'd get together and we wrote fairly complicated things, but we didn't really have a great structure for like
Okay, so
refining.
as the members change, it started to just kind of organically go. Okay.
And we recorded Power Trip with Tom Morris down in Tampa, who was great, but basically there wasn't a lot of pre-production, like, to get ready for the recording. We kind of thought we would go do it live, and it was complicated. But then
That can be
along the
magical
way,
or horrible when you do that. Like you can hit
well,
magic and be like, this was the way to do it. Or you can be like, we can't do this again.
right? It's kind of a little bit of both.
Mistakes that were made.
But then okay, so then along the way on the US tour and then going into the other tour, Mike on bass left. So Paul knew Guy because I think he played. I was just reminded lately that they had played together in a band on Long Island called TC Cross, and so Paul convinced, said, "Hey, Guy, come check this thing out." And Guy has said in a really funny way, he's like, "I didn't even know what you guys' music was. I like Frank Zappa and I like other stuff." He's like, "I just listened to it. It just sounded crazy." So it took a while to even like listen to it and consider like, are these guys like have a record deal? But like, what is it? I don't even is it even music? So we went up with a guy who's really great, and of course he's a solid guy and a great player. And Guy did the European tour and a bunch of other stuff with on that Power Trip thing. And then at that point we still had Dave Miranda on drums. And then Dave had a day job, and he had a kind of relationship. I think he was getting married and stuff. And now remember, we're going into making another album, but it's like there's no money.
Right. It's like this would be like the third official album in at this point with the band. This at the time, rock's getting big. This isn't really a genre yet. So
we're not really on anybody's radar. And so it's like if
a
you're
labor of love, or you
that's right.
Go spend time with your love who might be in labor.
Right. And Dave also played another band called The Six and Violence, who are really fantastic, with Kurt Stenzel. And he kind of had other stuff going on. So, and I also forgot, we had Tony Scaglione for a while, who played with Slayer when Dave Lombardo left. Tony came with us and he kind of did a whole string of shows. But then it wasn't the right fit for Tony either. Mostly it was like, I think it was hard to kind of do Slayer and then basically sit in a crappy van filled with Dorito bags and, like eat stale donuts because we had no money, like at all. So at that point,
you guys are probably happier together. I always get the feeling when I've learned as time's gone on that it wasn't a high five bunch of guys. It was just a bunch of guys that were really intense. And the music kind of showed what the backstage was probably like with those guys.
Yeah, so now we wind up with, I think Guy, I can't remember if Guy or Paul had some connection to Mike Boyko. Mm-hmm. And so we got Mike Boyko and we changed like where we rehearsed. We started rehearsing in Mike's parents' garage. And we were actually rehearsing, rehearsing to get the drum parts and the everything to interlock, like the kick. We kind of put click tracks to like figure out the tempos of different parts of the song, because sometimes like songs shouldn't all be in the same tempo.
No.
And we actually did really heavy pre-production work for that stuff. And then we kind of got Tom Soares, who I think we came to because he had up at Normandy Studio, and Tom had done Leeway, the Leeway album, which we really loved because he understood guitar heaviness and clarity at the same time.
I'm also a fan of Leeway. I've actually had Eddie on many times.
Yeah, amazing. So we got Tom, and Tom was like he's a real like both an engineer and a producer at the same time. Where like there's a really big difference in the way different people kind of approach things.
And so the label was thinking something different than I'm going to keep stepping on you. So the label was like, they thought they were getting this behind camera, camera one, camera two.
Right.
So what a great surprise that your own evolution of just band members in time kind of came up with this without the label being like, hey, you guys need a new sound. Like you guys actually evolved and said, here you go. Here's something new. Hope you like it.
Right. I think like we weren't trying to evolve. We were just trying to be good.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, but in retrospect, it was you guys were evolving.
But we had just think like there was out of the 5 people in the band, there were 3 new people in relationship to Here Comes Trouble versus Power Trip, right? And it was like the rhythm section, and then kind of Paul, who was also kind of more and more kind of involved in songwriting and production and stuff too. So, and also like Howie Abrams and Steve Martin, they would come to like, again, I found this like amazing because we've been doing it for like 6 years or something. Nobody had ever paid any, maybe somebody came to a show. They would come to rehearsals and be like, that song is killer. This song, like, I'm not exactly sure. Like, it seems like too long or whatever. And we're like, I don't know, but we'll take a look at it. So it was like the first time, like, like in a traditional way where there's an A&R person who says, this song is the lead track, and like that one, like maybe it could be slightly different. So we actually had conversations about the songs as we were
Oh, really?
kind of doing them, first time ever. And then Tom Soares definitely had kind of strong opinions about things, and the tracking of the music was done really good. We did it all up in Warren, Rhode Island. So we're like sequestered into this little studio up there. It was like, I don't know, recording like Brad Whitford from Aerosmith solo projects and things like
Yeah.
that. And yeah, and then basically we had an album in the can, and everybody all of a sudden was excited about it. So your original question was like, what's up with the name change? So I think we had the album.
Well, yeah, I was bringing up the fact that you were talking about, you actually were putting the contest up of the things about it still. And to me, I'm like, if I can't have a chance at voting now about it and giving it a new name, I'm not going to do it.
Yeah, well, Dave Bett, who was the art director through all those album cycles, kind of sent me a package maybe about a year ago. And honestly, I had forgotten that there even was a name contest. So Dave found a bunch of stuff he wanted to get rid of, and he sent, and that was in there. And what's so funny is, we did interviews for years. And honestly, and in most interviews, we just said totally contradictory. We said whatever we wanted to say during those. But a lot of the time, it was more helpful to say it was a new band than to say, well, it's a band that kind of changed. Just because all of a sudden we had kind of all these people who were interested. And
it feels like a new band, and it feels like you're being a sellout if you're not the same band you started, especially out of New York. Like if you're just a new band, it's like, oh, that's what they are. Oh, you changed? How come you changed? You're a sellout if you change.
Right.
Or
that's
grow.
Exactly right. It's like the Ramones syndrome. Like, how come all the albums that followed don't sound like the first album? Because the first album was amazing, and everything else after it is kind of incremental compromise or sellout or whatever. So I think you nailed that. But now, like, I think, like, who cares? Like, I think it's more interesting to talk about like the complexity between it kind of was 100% a new band. Mm-hmm. And also it kind of was 100% an evolution from the previous thing. It's not like, you know, if you're doing an interview, you have to say something finite or specific.
Well, especially back then, it's not. I mean, this is a new world right here, and this podcast world could last for 10 more minutes, or this could be a new format for 10 more years and go off. You know what I'm saying? I mean, podcasting of this level has become an evolution from radio. Now, radio people are trying to do podcasts to catch up because they're losing part of their audience. Ironically, it's not a dig towards them because they've been doing this for a while. But you couldn't get those interviews back then unless you could get a good radio person that knew your stuff. And you were playing in, and then back then it wasn't the same because once again, kids, without that thing called the internet, without the Googles, the radio stations were almost in certain areas and they didn't hear, you know, this record station would break this album here. This album is this Def Leppard was broken by a record label down in I forgot where by a B-side or something. And then, you know, got Scatterbrain up over here. And then these two radio stations aren't going to hear each other because they're in different stations. And then when you're doing a radio or like you're doing a show or you're in a band, your world is so much in that band. So when an artist goes, I didn't really listen to that album, I don't really know that. It's not because they're in their own head. It's literally because your world, especially the music business, is so focused on the next thing you're doing with that music project. There's not a lot of room.
Right.
And so you guys were doing your thing and radio stations were doing their thing. So you had to do short answers. In my long answer of it to people that it just kind of fills out the questions I think people have. Like you had to be finite and you had to be quick because that's what it was. The magazines were quick. You had a page, you had this.
That's right. Magazines were quick and, you know, they had to be snappy because they weren't for like, it wasn't like in-depth journalism. It was more like Tiger Beat kind of, you know, even if it was in like a metal magazine, like the metal magazines like Metal or Metal Hammer or Metal Mania, like they were all kind of really poppy for like for young people.
I
So
think the Rip one, I've had talked to Lon because he switched over from doing Hustler. So he
Lon Friend.
yeah. So but I think when he did Rip was a better quality magazine to me on that point, where I think he came in with a different vision of the presentation. It was like a fresh thing, you
Right.
know. Whereas I think some of the people doing the other publications, I mean, there's other good rock magazines too, but I think we're
Yeah.
coming in because that's what you wanted in the pop team
Yeah.
geek
Yeah.
group. So I think that other magazine, there was two angles coming in. So you
Yeah.
had the
Yeah.
short little the bullet points, you know, Glenn likes pizza, going out bowling, and you know,
Right.
the little bullet
Tommy's in
point
a
of
chicken suit and he's kind
right.
of, like those kind of like crazy things that happened are the content. And the writers were good and like they're kind of smart guys, but the format was really specific. And
They didn't
then you
give you a
get
lot of room as a
and
writer
then
to
you
do
get
much.
and then you get fanzines, which were just, like I can't remember, like we like did like hundreds of fanzine interviews. And those are mostly guys that or girls that are or whatever that are like just figuring out how to do stuff. So, they'll talk to you about one specific thing, but it's just like they're just figuring it out. It's kind of it's
It's an
not
evolution of actually, it's an early evolution of what this is. And to me, it's funny. It's like when I started this, I didn't start as trying to be like a lot of the shows wanted to be like this show or this show. And I would say the show's not even named after me. To me, I want to be like, I'm seeing these things, I'm reading these things online, and it's feeling like kind of like a TMZ headline, or I'm hearing this. I'm like, but with a fan or a lover of music that has a little bit of knowledge, and I do have a little bit of knowledge, comes in and can approach the situation who's been behind the scenes, but can kind of try to bridge it a little bit more without making it because you still have to talk about the album. You still have to talk. There's certain things you got to talk about, but maybe not saying, "Hey, run the time you that was cool." Like you don't want to do that either. But the energy of a true fan always gets eclipsed by the business too. So if you can kind of merge them together, it allows someone like you or any my guess I tried doing to just kind
right,
of say everything
right,
in a way that it still sticks with the story
right, right.
and it gets you to be a little honest, as opposed
Yeah, I
to
feel like you were supposed to
bullet
pretend like
points.
there was no music business back in the day. You were just like somehow you were so self-possessed and so amazingly talented that you just showed up in Albuquerque to play the show and like and you kind of went on stage and it was like glorious. And then you didn't get into a crummy van and drive for 16 hours. You just materialized in the next amazing
That was the
place.
rock star thing, and people still believe that though. They still talk and they say things like, and they talk to me like, "You talked to so and so, they were like a rock star. They're a rock star." It's like that line, in Saturday Night Live, which his face says, "I'm just like everyone else. I put my platinum jeans on one leg at a time." I'm totally messing up now. Who plays the producer? Christopher Walken when he plays the producer.
Oh, nice.
Think how great he is, but I just put on my, one thing at a time. There's Everyone's still the same people. They're just
Yeah.
immensely talented. It'd be like if you like horses, or I don't know, and I talked to somebody who makes the best saddles. They still might be the best saddle guy, but every day that saddle guy or person or whoever they would be, that saddle person would just be like,
Right.
that's. I have other stuff. I have bills, and I get this thing in my neck, and
Right.
I got these relatives calling me. I don't want to see. Even though I have a platinum albums, but I still have people I don't want to see in my family. My mom's mad at me.
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying? And those things don't just go away. I think, but back then it was all
You're
magic,
supposed to hide them. Yeah, yeah.
right?
You're supposed to like that wasn't part of. Even then, those were the things that would inspire you to write, or those were the things that why you were a musician in the first place, or you got drawn into like a particular quality of music because of your situation in life. But then you had
Escapism, or yeah,
to erase it all.
it is kind of funny though. And then, but so at that point, you guys had a sound, and I think the craziness of the band was always able to be explored, and like I said, I saw you guys a bunch of times live, two potentially. Yeah, your first time seeing Tommy in a chicken suit and his charisma and his energy, you know, and then it was like literally for a fan of music, like I didn't know who to get my eyes on, who was playing what. Because it'd be like listen to the bass of guy, and then be like the guitar of you guys, and then you with your pigtails, and then which inspired me later in life when my hair was long to do that the weirdest work situations too, just to harass people like that'd be really funny. But
It's a good style,
it's a good look,
underused.
it really is. But they're like, you gonna really go pigtails to work? Why not? It was like in the 90s. I'm like, well, you guys gotta loosen up. Um, but then like and the drums were fantastic, and then Tom, so like everyone's just so good, and then and the energy, and it just once again, it was another thing that set a new tone, I think, for performances, for live music, for like someone like me, you know,
Oh, that's
because it
awesome.
was so real and it sounded so good, but it was a tongue in cheek. Because like I said, you guys would do girls, girls, girls. Who in the band was a Pat Travers fan? Because you guys always did boom, 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 up with the lights. And you guys were a little more less goofy about that one. So somebody dug it, the
Uh,
song, and they wanted it.
well, like Long Island was kind of like more a rock, a rock tent. Like you couldn't play a hardcore show in Long Island. I think you can these days. I'm pretty sure you
Yeah.
can. But like it was like, either you're like Jimmy Buffett or Leonard Skinner or
Yeah.
I don't know, like Boom Boom Out Go the Lights must have come from it must have been either Paul or Guy would be
I hadn't heard them. Like I knew of the song, but because I was listening more like rock and all kinds of back then, like Scatterbrain. So like to me, that was not something that was on my list, especially. I think I heard more from you guys than I actually heard from Travis until like later on in life because going to all the shows, it was you guys who's, you know,
yeah,
like a Pat Travis song. I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that song. And then like you guys did like every show or at the end or something, you guys throw it in there.
we would throw weird stuff in like rock and roll hoochie coo or it was a bunch of different Bon Jovi songs or like mostly because they're just we kind of thought that they were inappropriate, but if we rocked them hard enough, they would kind of like
Well, I think you guys come out doing girls, 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 dressed as girls, 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 you know. And I'm not gonna actually, there were other things you guys actually had in your costumes. Well, I'm gonna leave those off for the family part of the show. And I think you know what I'm talking about, which were even hilarious. Had me in tears. Um,
I remember this one show where we played it was still Ludichrist and we played this this tour and it was in winter. It was like freezing cold in Northern Europe. And and we were all in like some, like those kind of camping vans that people think are cool now. Like, yeah, when it's you and all your gear on top of your lap, you're like with guitar cases for like 6 hours a day, like driving.
I
So
never could have toured.
we toured in those things, and we went to Berlin before the wall came down, so it was still kind of like this military state.
So yeah.
And we played in some squat with MDC, Millions of Dead Cops, and I can't remember another Erosion from Germany with us, who were great. And I was like a big MDC fan from way back. And Dave from MDC came out. He brought different costumes with him. He brought this Elvis costume, and he would do like this Elvis performance during the, it'd be like dead cops, and dead cops like doing the karate kicks and stuff. I was just like, what the fuck, like what the fuck? Because like their music to me was like so intense and serious and kind of political, but like those guys had been touring for like 15 years, like like 9 months a year or something. And so I think Dave had, I don't want to speak for Dave, like I'm sure he kind of has written somewhere what he did, but like he
Levity.
invented ways to kind of like enliven the show for themselves and for the audience or whatever. So I don't know what inspired Tommy's chicken suit. It was a chicken suit. There was a nun suit.
Yeah, oh, I remember the Duncy. That's right. Yeah.
We all certainly had like clothes that we'd pick up, like secondhand clothes that seemed wrong that we picked. But the
The
main
chicken
thing
suit was
was
funny, but and then with the nun with a beer and a cigarette was always my favorite look, especially back then. That was like this is a classic because it was just so, especially because back then you couldn't do that, you know.
I think the thing that I kind of always appreciated about it was like there was a whole world of bands who came on stage and tried to be sexy, like you're supposed to look at them and admire them, like, oh,
Right.
these guys are so beautiful, or like, wow, he's such a amazing whatever. And I think we kind of always tried to do the exact opposite, which is like sort of look like
Right.
un-
Goofballs.
repulsive or just like falling apart or kind of whatever, like absurdist. But then like take the music really seriously and almost like as this way to just kind of be together with the people who came to see the show.
I think that's a tie-in though with what you had said in earlier when we talked about Guy. Me and Guy do a bunch of Zappa stuff. We're both mutual Zappa lovers, and I think the tie-in from the seriousness of the music with the fun of the energy is a carryover
Right.
for fans of Zappa you know. The interesting is like see how many Zappa fans that became to you, discovered you guys and liked you guys, or said, "Oh, I like Zappa," and they discovered you guys around the same time, or like, you know what I'm saying? Like that
Right, right,
line of how many other fans there are.
right, right, right. I think that's a good connection. Yeah, yeah.
That's
There's
probably that
something.
would have been a bigger draw for the audience actually to aim for like your record label push towards the
Yeah,
Zappa fans because they're a lot more open minded even
right.
back then.
Yeah, like any kind of music, if it has the right spirit behind it, right? Like, I mean, very
Yeah,
much in the Zappa thing. Like, you move from like a jazzy thing to a freaky thing to a
an
groovy
orchestra to a
thing,
rock thing to
right?
something just totally goofy and busting your stones like is something amazingly hard to do, you
Right,
know, with these ridiculous things and but also super creative.
right,
But then he'd laugh, you
right,
know,
right.
and he like and I'll share Dweezil shared this. I do stuff with a Dweezil show on his website. And Dweezil was talking one time. He's telling me about his father was in the studio, and he called his Dweezil's dad called him down and said, "Hey, I want you to hear something." And album, a witch drowning, a ship too late or something. I'm
Yeah,
entitled now.
ship
Yeah,
arriving too late.
thank you. In the song, you know how it's like at that weird monotone, that weird tone in one of the songs, got that weird, really, really crazy sound. When Frank did that, he called Dweezil and he said when he played it for Dweezil, he was laughing so hard. He was crying because it was so crazy. He was hitting the soundboard and he was slid underneath the bar. He was like sliding the chair crying because he thought it was so funny when he was making it. So obviously Zappa got it
Yeah,
when he was doing it. But the music's also crazy and brilliant. You know what I'm saying? Like, so going back to a band like you guys, when you guys don't take
right.
yourself too seriously, it's like it's got an energy of maybe heavier, faster, others music.
Right.
It's good for an open. It opens a lot of eyes.
Yeah, yeah.
Ears.
No, I kind of love that. I love that connection. And it also kind of says like we here together at this moment, like we're having our own little party, you know, and like you can still have all the hairband stuff and you can still have the other stuff that's happening in the world and kind of enjoy it. But like this is a goofy, goofy and serious moments, kind of like our
Right.
little time together, you know.
And I think and it worked out. I think, and obviously you guys label wise, I mean, Skip Boogery, I thought it was a great album. Obviously, it was more polished sounding than the other one. The song structure was a little bit different. You guys were doing some of the songs earlier on before the album, which was something you don't do as much nowadays.
Right.
Like you guys did Grandma's House of Babes, I remember before it came on the album.
Yeah, I can't remember if things were. I don't. I think everything. Well, okay. I have a good anecdote. Skin Boogery is actually the second batch of songs that, or okay, in a weird way, Skin Boogery is the third Scatterbrain album
Mhm.
because we put when we moved over to Elektra, we put a whole set of songs together, like 10 songs, and we cut a demo in Paul's basement or in the I can't remember, we were in a rehearsal studio and we had like a Paul had like a Tascam eight
Yeah,
track,
I mean,
you know,
yeah, the
like
mini, yeah,
cassette based kind of thing, you
that
know.
weird metal cassettes. They're like a weird,
Yeah.
yeah,
And we kind of did a whole like we rehearsed, we kind of did a whole set of songs and we gave it to Elektra. And at that point our A&R guys were two senior vice presidents, Howard Thompson and Peter Lubin. And we gave it to them. They're like, you're gonna fucking dig this. It's like so crazy, whatever. And there was like silence for like 2 weeks. And we were like, and finally we got like some conference call. I can't remember, we had a conference call or we had a meeting or whatever. And they were like, these songs are so bad. It was like, dude, we just like we're not on board with the stuff you guys wrote. You guys should just need to kind of write another, like just kind of toss these away and just write a totally different album. And we were like, what? Like it's like our history was like, well, mine and Tommy anyway. Like
yeah.
nobody even paid attention to like Immaculate Deception. Power Trip, like definitely nobody paid attention. Here Comes Trouble was the first moment we somebody paid
Pay
attention and they
attention.
were enthusiastic, right? And then we basically did the same process again, and you know we were a little more worn out from being
tour.
touring and kind of just being like, you grind yourself up a bit. But we felt like some of the songs were pretty good. And but no. Hold on. Am I messing it up? Okay, I might be messing up the story here. No, I think it's right. I think kind of I think it's right that that demo was before Scambuggery, and then we kind of did this game. But there's a chance, okay, because it's been so much time, and my
All
brain
right.
alcohol addled, over time, that it could be a possibility that the demo was afterwards. But I don't I don't remember it like that. I remember it like that it was before, and then we went back and we kind of rewrote
Did those songs
more
ever
songs.
resurface anywhere else though later on?
I think a couple of variations. Well, this is what makes me kind of doubt my own memory. A couple of the like a couple of the riffs and things that like they got kind of they continued to Paul and Tommy and the guys kind of continued to evolve them, and they kind of turned into some things on that last Mundus Intellectualis
Mhm.
EP album. Um, particularly like the guitar figures and things, which makes me think that I'm wrong, that that came before Scambuggery. It makes me think it kind of came after, but I don't know. I've got to take a look at the date. I'm sure I've got some documents around here I can take a look at,
I wouldn't
so I
doubt
don't
it. You've got a lot of,
misrepresent what happened. But
but people get the point that it's it was you had to redo the songs. Things are changing, and then actually that album was it Fine Line or no? Was it the video? There's one video I think, not much playing on it, and I'm saying as a fan now watching because at the point I was not
right,
with the
right,
label. So I'm saying how much I got to see it. I was like, I think I saw the video once. I think I had to go back and
right,
find it on YouTube. There's like a crappy version on YouTube of all the Scatterbrain videos. There's like no good versions of anything out there. So
right.
anybody out there that has good versions of the stuff, please let me know, and or at least let Glenn know. Well, I'll direct it to the
Yeah,
guys because there's not a lot of good copy. Or actually, I'm gonna say, please anybody that has live footage,
right. Good live footage. Yeah,
good live footage. You know,
yeah. The first single from that was a song called "Big Fun,"
oh, that's right,
and
Big Fun. That's right, Big Fun was
and
a single.
and George Seminara, who had done the "Don't Call Me Dude" and the "Down with the Ship" videos off the first album, came in and kind of did a video, a very silly video.
Circusy.
It's like circus in a circus camp or something. And then then basically, I don't think it did anything. You know,
That
like
was the video I'm thinking of too. By the way, it wasn't Fun. It was that was something I'm thinking Big Fun.
I don't think anybody picked it up, and like radio stations played it once or twice, but like nothing really happened. And then we did a video for a more serious song. It was kind of like a darker theme. And so one of the guys from Pearl Jam was like producing videos at that point. I can't remember which guy, one of the guitarists. And he was the video producer. We went out and did it in LA for Fine Line. And also the same thing. Like
Nothing.
it just didn't really gain traction.
Well, that was 91, 92, and all the big rock bands, even
Right.
the ones that weren't copies of copies, the original sounding bands that were also having a hard time, were losing their contracts. So there was no audience. It was literally turning into a Pearl Jam audience. So like anybody that was just from that time period got chopped to the knees.
Yeah, I think like they were just kind of like that was the end of that period of music. Like, I mean, we got received notice that Elektra didn't want to do well.
They were the clock run out on you guys, I guess, in the
Well,
contract.
our two, we felt like when we went over to Elektra, like we had the two senior vice presidents were like like they were
Yep,
massive Scatterbrain fans, and within months of being there, both of them got fired,
not a good sign.
and we were like,
Every
so
story of of a band being dropped starts off with the guys that were chimping us got fired, and within a few months, they weren't even taking our calls.
yeah, they definitely weren't taking our calls. And then we just got like a lawyer's, like we basically had nobody at the record company to call, right? And we received like a legal notice that they didn't want to do the second option. And we're like, okay, like what are you gonna do? Like, um, But it was a funny, that's a funny, like 91 is a really funny moment in music. The stuff kind of ramped up and like all sorts of stuff that was thought to be like alternative or weird got grouped together and like popularized. And then as soon as that happened, then basically everything sort of the bottom kind of dropped out again.
And at that time, I don't. It doesn't feel like there's any weird details. So like for me, for you, that's probably around the time you at the end of that album cycle is when you left because you just started doing you did some recording with Monkey Pup and then you toured with them, and then not that long after you moved on and did So Deep, and the rest of the guys went on as a four piece, I think, to do that the 7 song EP.
Right, right. Yeah, I remember like the after the Electra moment, we were kind of all trying to decide what to do. We talked to different like a couple people about possibly producing or getting involved as a manager, and it just didn't like I don't think everybody was on the same page with what everybody wanted to do. Like
Yeah,
there was one school of thought that we should just wait and see, and somebody would come and like help us, and or another idea that we should be proactive, and there was just different opinions. So I thought, well, okay. I felt like I had a pretty good head of steam. And I had a girlfriend at the time who had just moved from Los Angeles to Nashville. And I'd gone to visit her a couple of times. And I was like, I've lived in New York in Long Island my whole life. Like, I think I'm just going to move to Nashville and kind of do something down there. So I literally just put my stuff in my car and moved to Nashville. And, and all of it gets a little bit out of sequence in my mind, but I think when I was visiting down there, I had met some of the guys who had this band called The Hardcore, and they had like a couple shows. Like they had lost their record label. They did a first album, was produced by Joe Nicolo of the Butcher Brothers,
and this is
Jim.
this is the beginning of you in the Stone Deep, right?
Yeah, that's the beginning of Stone Deep.
And this is what timeline now for people that know, because this is alternative music. It's really weird. That was the world of one hit wonders because labels were giving you one album, one song.
Right.
Any kind of thing happened. If your pants were like 10 times bigger than what you needed, you had a good shot at a contract.
That's right.
But no, seriously, the music was different. And I want people to get an idea of where you're at with this because this wasn't Nashville. Because at this point, Nashville was changing. This was the beginning of it. Nashville changing from being just country music.
Right.
It was country and Western. No, it was country music.
Both kinds.
Both kinds. Yeah, both kinds of music here, country and Western. Where's that from?
Blues Brothers.
Yeah, thank you. It was evolving, starting to all different types of music,
right.
to rap and to rock. Obviously, rap rock for you guys, but it's evolved now. It's like that and Vegas are the two meccas now. It's not New York and LA.
Exactly. No, I mean Nashville had like that's the funny thing. Like Nashville, even when I moved there, had a really long history of like just people playing music. They were like jazz bands and blues bands.
Good songwriters, session players, right? And songwriting and just songwriting teams.
Tons and tons of other kinds of music that weren't country going on down there. But it had an infrastructure where if you were a young band, you could record, you could do all this stuff with like high quality gear and people.
So, but hardcore. So, what were they? What was their sound at the time before you came in?
They were they were like a rap rock thing.
Okay.
And again, they worked with Joe Nicolo, and Jam Master Jay co-produced it, and they were on Interscope. So like, they kind of like they were like rap rock, but with more of a dance thing going on. So like like you could say like, do you remember the Limbo Maniacs?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. Okay.
Me and the Limbo Maniacs, and maybe their parents, and you.
Right. Exactly.
And maybe the rest of the guys at Scatterbrain.
There's a thing with like Limbo Maniacs could be heavy, but behind it there was always like almost like a
groove. They were a groove band, I think.
They're a groove band. So the hardcore kind of had more of that, and they kind of would dress in like sort of pseudo military, almost like somewhere between the militia and like a drum corps kind of like outfits. And they had a couple singles. They were on tour with Ice-T and Body Count and Primus, and they had like this whirlwind thing where they got signed, they were super famous, and then they were dropped. And I was having a beer in a bar and with this guy Kelly, and he was like, yeah, we still have like 3 or 4 shows, but we like the guitarist quit and one of the rappers quit, and they pay good. And I
So
was
this
like,
is the second band you met up with them in a bar to get the
yeah,
gig of a
I was starting
crossover
to,
band. I'm really feeling a pattern here.
I was starting to see a pattern 40 years later.
Yeah, just saying.
I said, I'll play and I'll do the shows with you guys. They said, well, you don't know the songs. I said, well, you got an album. Like, you're just doing the album, right? I said, yeah. I said, so I'll just learn the album and then I'll meet you at the show. So,
Really, that feels sketchy. Just
yeah, but
meeting
I
somebody at
had,
the bar to offer you anything, and I'll meet you at the show. We're just gonna do the song. We're gonna have you show up as a stranger. Like
yeah, yeah. So it's really gutsy to say that and also gutsy to agree to it.
trust somebody. Like, yeah, are you sure you're gonna show who? I don't even know his name. How do
Right.
you?
Well, we never practiced and we went out on the road and we did like 3 shows and they were great. Like the band was like those guys were super tight. Their songs were really, really structural.
Mhm.
Like in other words, they each song would have like 2 riffs in them and they would just kind of alternate. And then there was like
But
there was
you were also well seasoned though from all your years with punk, hardcore, and funk type of music with Scatterbrain and Ludicrous. Like you already put the time
yeah,
in to fit in
yeah,
with them. It
yeah.
wasn't like you were a metal guy trying to fit in with a rap band or a groove band. You
No,
were
no.
already in that
I could
mindset.
I could totally do it and I could learn like it was very easy to learn like 15 songs in like 2 days or whatever. So um yeah, I was like, if you play all the time and you play live all the time,
Right.
like your head's just in a place where you're like, oh, this is sort of like that, and this
Yeah.
one's like this. And if like you only have to have a little bit of memory of it, and then it's just
But
you're
once again, for people that aren't aware of you just dropping into a new band, it helped to have the magic, the seasoning of the sauce because it did carry over from your other experience, kind of like a job, like your resume. It just helped,
yeah, totally. Yeah.
even though they didn't know you had this experience. So it kind of worked out well for them.
Yeah. So everybody got along so well on those shows. Then we said, well, why don't we just get like at that point, the idea was, why don't we just get another record deal for the hardcore and like, um, just make the next record. Like they already had a bunch of new songs. And I was like, what are you guys doing? Like what are you guys sitting in a bar drinking with me for? Like just get your next record deal and do it. And they were like, all right. So we put together the rest of the songs, we finished them up and we made a demo and and then we just kind of started doing stuff. We did stuff together. We made like 5 or 6 albums over the course of almost 10 years. We played like a million shows in the South. Um, we got great press, but we never wound up with a record label that was on board. So
Really.
it's kind of a funny thing. Like NARAS, the Grammy Foundation, named us the best unsigned artist in the United States. We won every Nashville or a whole bunch of Nashville best band in Nashville, like beating out like country artists that are super famous. But then it was just regional, you know.
And it was considered an artist, so they're looking at you from a different aspect as an entertainment, as a songwriting, not being packageable for everybody's going to sit home in the morning, getting together, making their toast, and going to work on the radio. You
Right. And
know,
still stuff even through like 2000, stuff was still very much in formats. Like remember like 99, you're still in like internet 2.0. Like we haven't hit the like you don't hit the new version of the internet until like the middle of the 2004.
I wouldn't even go on the internet. When people told me I thought it was an awesome idea, I'm like, get back to me when it's better. Like,
Exactly.
like literally, I didn't touch computers until I can't even tell you. And I'm an IT guy, but like I was like, I honestly said, my roommate had one. I'm like, nah, that's too boring for me. You guys need really to get that thing
It's super
like
boring.
space page and stuff. I can't wait for that. Like, you just really the amount of what you put into it is just not rewarding.
Oh my God.
But good
Yeah,
potential. Let me know when things are better.
yeah, good potential.
It worked
So
out. We're talking. So
so that was the kind of beginning of the hardcore stuff. The Monkey Pup stuff, like I always kind of liked those guys. And like when we were doing Ludichrist, at some point Chris, who was the singer, I can't remember even what album it was. He said, "Hey, why don't you come down? Like, why don't you come and do like a guitar? Like, we have great guitar players, but like they're not really solo. They don't really play
mhm.
guitar. So why don't you come do a solo on one of the songs?" I was like, "Yeah, call me up." So I kind of went and I forget what album it's on. I'd have to go back and take a look. but I went in and played a solo on one of the songs, maybe on their second album. And then it's right around that time when I moved to Nashville. I think I had just moved to Nashville, and Chris called up again and said, "Hey, we have like a European festival tour, and it starts in like 5 days or something from now. And our guitar player just broke his leg or whatever. Can you kind of do it? Like, you want to do it?" I was like, "Yeah, okay, I'll do it." And he's like, "Well, we'll only be able to get in like one rehearsal or something before we go." I was like, "Okay, that's fine. Just send me like a cassette or a CD of the songs, and I'll learn them before, and then we'll go do it." So I think I drove up to New York from Nashville, and sorry, to New Jersey. I can't remember what town those guys were in. And we did like one rehearsal in Chris's garage, and then we went to the airport and did this really long trip to like Finland, where you had to like fly to the Netherlands and go 20 hours on a ferry. And we played a whole bunch of like outdoor festivals, and it was super, and it was like, I definitely was a little bit loose, I would say, loose at the first festival, but by the time it got going, like it was super fun. And I think I did that one, and then I did another one. Maybe the second one, it was Mucky Pup and Leeway packaged together. I don't think both of them were. I just kind of remember the Leeway guys. I can't remember.
So you were just filling in. That's why it became a permanent thing. It was just you were just filling in and helping out.
Yeah, I was just filling in, and the guys were good. Everybody was good. And then I think we were back in New York, and Chris said he was working on an album called Lemonade, and he said, "Hey man, why don't you come into the studio? We're kind of doing this." And it was kind of vague, like what he, like exactly what he needed. Like he needed extra guitar playing, or kind of like another production voice or whatever. And so I kind of hung around. Like they mostly had everything already under control.
Yeah.
Chris was like kind of like, he's a producer himself, so he really had it together. I think I played guitar on one track, and we did like an acoustic song together that's like hidden on the CD, which is a Billy Bragg cover.
I know who it is. I just wouldn't know it really bad, so it hit me with the.
It was like totally bizarre. But Chris was like, "Hey, let's do this Billy Bragg song." I'm like, "Cool, man. How's it go?" What's the progression? We'll figure out some voicing on the acoustic. He was like, "Can we do it on this old Martin?" I'm like, "Yeah, I think we can." And we just kind of figured out how to do it. So I love those guys.
That's really awesome.
But like there should just be more. There should just be more of that. Like just call up some extra people you like, and like the formation of bands, like is.
I don't think it's like that anymore.
It probably never should have been like that. It was just because that's all you could do back in the day.
I think it was better because now I think mostly music is now mostly pictures on Instagram of the beach and a guitar and a notebook.
I think that's right. Of your laptop, picture of your laptop on a
notebook. Yeah, please, people. I want to say anybody's watching. If you don't actually have music and you just have pictures of your instruments on the beach, stop sending me questions.
No, I don't want to do an interview about how you took the picture.
Yeah, you don't. If you haven't actually done anything, there's nothing to talk about. Just no desire for somebody to hear something nobody's done anything of. It's got nothing to do with me. I'm just a vessel.
There's definitely like doing music is like you should be doing a lot of stuff. Like there's a lot of stuff to do music.
Right. And there's a lot of steps out there. And I think what's exciting is, we've probably should wrap this up, but we've hit a lot, and I think I appreciate it. We've a lot of contacts, so a lot of different dates and stuff, especially when it's weird on the internet. I think you've got a lot of stuff. I don't know how there isn't already a Scatterbrain Ludichrist book or something put together. I mean, it just feels like with all the material out there, you could put some kind of big cover scrap, even if it's a fan style thing out there. I don't think there's a lot out there, and that's why I think this was a fun show, because the lineage of all of it is good, because different interviews have been asked to do different things. So I think it's got a little more meatier into that kind of stuff, because it's hard with the timeline to kind of figure it out. you know.
It's really hard.
And these are a lot of questions I've had as a fan, and there's not a lot out there.
It's been hard for me to kind of remember what we did. And basically, I was there. It's like, but
You're not the first artist to not remember the exact date of something. Trust me.
there's a kind of writer. I think also, why am I making everything be in Finland? I think he is from Finland, who wrote in a book on crossover, was considered crossover from hardcore to metal stuff. He wrote like a chapter in the book on Ludichrist, and he sent me it. It said, "Hey man, I found you online." And it's awesome that he did it, but also in kind of looking at it, it's like you can just see it's like he's just really trying to pull together. Like there's not that much information you could find online.
Right. There isn't at all, and there isn't much videos. There isn't much anything.
So I was like, it's one of the things where I said, well, maybe I'll take some of these old pictures and I'm no author, but I'll throw some of this stuff up and then try and write extended captions. And if I'm wrong, then hopefully somebody who remembers it better than me will kind of chime in.
Right.
And there's been a bunch of that.
And it stuff comes up. Like I said, if there's any fans out there that have stuff they can, obviously, Glenn, and there's also guys online, and there's this actually probably even best to be the Scatterbrain Facebook page to send it in to one place to make it easier. I'll put that link also. I'll put your link there. I'll put the Scatterbrain page in or anything. So people can go to these sites or Facebook pages and kind of check it out and
that's super.
Support.
Yeah, that's a great. I mean, yeah, people have stuff, and people keep tons of stuff, which is amazing.
The biggest mystery I have, I'm gonna say, is more of a generic thing, is when you get footage of something in a club and it's great footage, and you're like, it wasn't like you had a camera back then, so it was the VHS things, and you had the broken deck, so you had the strap, and you had the piece here. It's almost like you had a news crew with you. Who's sneaking that into a club where everyone's thrashing around like CBGBs, and you get this full film production that you're sneaking in to get this Van Halen bootleg or the Ramones? You know what I'm saying?
Right. It's not like
I never
phone.
saw that. Yeah. It's not the same. So whoever did that was magic.
And the other thing with unless you filmed on beta or a format that had a bigger that could be interpolated to a bigger, it's magnetic, but the old the CTR TVs, they're the equivalent of 640 by 480. So if you put it on a new screen, 640 by 480 is it's tiny.
And as you start doing, it's like taking a flip phone footage and kind of trying to polish it up.
Right. So to find kind of higher quality, there's stuff out there, and I think we just need to be honest. It's magnetic, which means there's a higher resolution than 640 by 480, but all the ways that it gets turned digital, basically still in relationship to the concept of a 640 by 480 broadcast matrix on your old TV set. So we're still suffering with a technical glitch in between how the magnetic stuff turns into digital stuff, in my opinion.
And that's hard. I'm one of the fans. That's where I get lost. I'm like, you want to see the band enough, and it's a really bad video. It's so bad. It's and then the audio is really bad too and distorted. I'm like, that's awesome for somebody. I can't.
Yeah, you can't
sonically hear it because I am also a lover of music, and I can take a low video or audio or some hums and stuff. But if it sounds like just a garbage truck on the stage with them because there's just so much of stuff going on because the audio, because it couldn't take the speakers, it couldn't take the sound. I'm like, it's kind of unlistenable.
Yeah, it's kind of unlistenable. I mean,
it's like having a cassette right now, and I don't have a cassette player. It's it's not going to help me.
It's just a document that it happened, but it's not really content you can do. So,
but it's out there.
I mean, that's what's going on. So the only other thing I can add is that from the Stone Deep period, I've just been going back and we're doing. The group is playing again as of the last year and a half, and we're doing shows down in Nashville. I mean, I live in New York, but we're doing shows down in Nashville where the other guys are, and re-releasing some of this stuff. So for me, it's kind of interesting. I've been trying to bridge people who are kind of scatterbrain, Ludichrist stuff and say, hey, actually stuff happened after that, and kind of tie things together. It's not the same. I mean, it's obviously really different stuff, but there's, if you're a guitar head, there's definitely some stuff to talk about. And if you're in a contemporary, what's really funny is people's the reaction online has been, hey man, how did you guys get that 90s sound that's so hip right now? Like, is there a software you use to get the 90s sound?
Called the
I'm
90s.
like, yeah, it was called doing it in the 90s.
Yeah, it's called the gear of the 90s. Yeah.
How'd you get that cool, like, old tape deck and like broke down guitar through a Ampeg V2 sound? Uh, that's
Okay,
exactly
to an
what it
old broke
was.
down and exactly the formula I use. Thank you. That's crazy.
So
That's
yeah,
awesome.
that's fun. It's been
So
fun.
check you guys out. So obviously people want to check out So Deep is check out your page, the links and everything. There's a lot of stuff out there. And Google helps too if you want to find more stuff. YouTube's got a lot of stuff out there.
Yeah, and all the
So,
streaming channels like Spotify and
yeah.
Amazon Music and blah 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 blah. You know them all. It's
Very
been
good.
awesome talking, man.
Thanks, man. I really appreciate it. I'm glad you come on and we'll revisit this again and we have other plans. I know. We'll
Yeah,
keep
well,
hush right now for the people, but there may be more stuff coming down.
there's
Yeah,
some herding of cats to be done.
there could be more stuff coming. It's just about timing when things are right. But thanks, man. I want people to check them out. Links are underneath.
Yeah.